Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Short and to the Point. Jess Kleinschmidt here for Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Y'all, I made it. The A's regular season is done. It was a long one, or an emotional roller coaster for sure. But now we're heading into the playoffs, and I'm excited about all the coverage that we'll be doing over there at the Comeback and Awful Announcing. Make sure you're listening to everything on there. But since the playoffs are upon us, I couldn't think of a better guest than Rich Hollenberg. He does pre and post for the Tampa Bay Rays over there at Bally Sports, but that's not all. He's done play-by-play for ESPN, for college basketball. You've probably seen him on NFL Network and ESPN. And it's really cool to have somebody as versatile as he is on the show, because he offers up a lot of advice about how to get into the industry. And I wish I had him as a resource back when I started several years ago, not that long ago, because I'm still so young, right? Anyways, here is my chat with Rich Hollenberg. Welcome back to Short and to the Point. Rich joins me. I talked about your intro earlier, and there's so many points that we can talk to you about and just these amazing titles that you've held. But let's talk about the versatility that you have, because when you're listing all these things that you do, how do you find the balance of it all? Because you are a host, you do sidelines, you've done different sports. How do you find the balance to be good at all of those things individually?
Well, essentially, Jess, what you're saying is what I've come to realize pretty quickly in the last couple of years, especially. I'm old and I've been around a long time. So I've had the opportunity to experience.
You're experienced, Rich. You're experienced.
Experienced, yes. A savvy veteran.
Mm-hmm.
But I graduated college 30 years ago. I went to Syracuse. I was a proud product of the Newhouse program, like so many sportscasters. And I didn't want to get into play-by-play. I thought my career path was SportsCenter. At the time, ESPN SportsCenter was king, and there wasn't even a close second place. So I thought that's where my career was going to take me. And then I quickly realized how idiotic a thought that was. Not that I couldn't get to that mountaintop, but I realized the reason I wanted to be a sportscaster in the first place was because I wanted to be at the games. I wanted to be at the events and have the best seat in the house. And I realized I was going to be in a studio working, covering these sports, which would have been fun, but not exactly where my passion lied. So I quickly determined, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to, I wanted to become a jack of all trades. Now, the biggest fear is, as you probably know, jack of all trades, master of none. I had the great good fortune very early on in my career, through a connection of a connection of a connection, getting in touch with Al Michaels. As a 20-something-year-old, I got on the phone with the legend himself, Al Michaels, and I asked him to that very point, like, I have a couple of job opportunities. I'm not sure exactly what I want to do. What do I do? What career path do I make for myself? And he said, and this was, again, 25 years ago, he said, I would have told you you're crazy to do anything but the one thing that you're driven to do, except for the fact that now the walls are coming down. And what I took from that to mean is you can carve out your own path. There is no one path to success in sportscasting. So I took pride in the fact that, could I report? Yes, I could. Could I anchor a show? Yes, I could. If called upon, could I learn how to do play-by-play? Because then I didn't focus on that in college. I believe I could. And I ended up doing all of that very early on in my career. And now that I'm mentoring young sportscasters, that's one of the tent poles of what I instruct them on. There is value in versatility. And I pride myself on being able to be versatile, whether it's different sports or different disciplines within sportscasting. If you give me an assignment, I'll do whatever work it takes to be viable at that particular assignment. And that's how I built my career.
So I need for you to mentor me real quick
Okay.
because only because I'm trying to be versatile and I think it's great, but I've been told before that that could actually hurt me. Just kind of like what Al Michaels and you like talked about. And I'm not just talking about sports related stuff either. And for me, I can't find the balance of entertainment and knowledge. And I feel like that's very difficult to have the consumer take away, oh, I learned something from her, but I was also entertained. But did you notice there being a shift over time? Because an agent before told me you need to just concentrate on one thing or you're never going to get hired. So how were you able to shift that? Because I could see from the infancy of your career embracing like, oh, I'm going to stick to college basketball. I'm going to stick to this. How were you able to confidently be versatile? Because I've been told to do the opposite.
Well, I will say this with all due respect. I have many friends who are in the agent business. I have had an agent myself many different times throughout my career. I was a small fish in a big pond of an agency.
Mhm.
I was a big fish in a small pond of a boutique agency. For the last 10 years, I haven't had an agent. I
Mhm.
rely on myself. Almost every job I've had is through relationships that I built through the years. And I think that is the best way to take control of your own career, Jess. And the
Mhm.
fact is that I rely on 3 words, and those 3 words are just say yes. If the
Mhm.
opportunity comes along and it sounds like a great chance and it feels like a great opportunity, then just say yes to it. No one is going to look down on you or discard you or discredit you because you went and did a volleyball match. And
Mhm.
what's Jessica Kleinschmidt doing volleyball for? She doesn't have any experience doing volleyball. Yes, but is she competent at her job? Does she know how to interview people? Does she know
Mhm.
how to cover a sport journalistically? If the answer is yes to all that stuff, it really doesn't matter what the event is. It's just like in news. No news reporter focuses only on 5 alarm fires or robberies or car
Right.
accidents. You cover the news. And sports reporters and sports hosts and play by play announcers alike, we cover sports. Give us a sport, we know how to cover it. And if you just say yes to those opportunities, I'm not saying yes to every single opportunity. You get to a point in your career where you feel like you can and should be maybe a little bit more selective, create a little bit more of a work life balance that older generation sportscasters that I now count myself in can say no. I have a family. I have 3 kids who are teenagers and older. I want to spend
Mhm.
more time with my family than I do giving up all my nights and all my weekends and
Mhm.
all my holidays and things like that that you have to as a sportscaster. So finding that work-life balance works for me now. But when I was younger, when I was in my 20s and I was single and I was on the go, I was going everywhere and anywhere I
Right.
could with a microphone in my hand.
Was there a point, or what was the point in your career where you were kind of able to say, I can be a little bit, I don't want to say picky because I know the sports world, you can't in certain regard, but as a family man and the schedule's insane, we all know that. What point of your career were you able to take a step back and say, I can actually find this work-life balance after putting all these X amount of years in?
I I'd love to say, Jess, that it happened years ago. I think it's
Mhm.
still happening as we speak right now.
Yeah.
I have a 20-year-old son. He's my oldest son, and he's a sophomore at UGA. And I want to say if there was one flashpoint, it was when he was a senior in high school, getting ready to go off to college 2 years ago. And I realized that while I still have 2 other teenagers coming up through the ranks, and I'm not an empty nester per se just yet, it all of a sudden hit me that before I know it, I'm going to blink and all 3 of my kids are going to be out of the house. And then I really will be an empty nester and looking at the next phase of my life in terms of my personal life. And so I
Mhm.
realized then that time is finite with your children. And I want to spend as much time with them as possible. Couple things happen. A, working at ESPN, listen, there are challenges wherever you work, and our industry is changing as we speak. But one thing that I've found to be really rewarding about working at ESPN for the last 15 plus years is that they are sensitive to your personal life. And
Wow.
so I took a relative gamble a couple of years ago when my son got into Georgia, and I called my boss and I said, look, I know I cover the Big 12 and I love covering the Big 12. I think it's the best basketball conference in America. But if there's any Georgia game that doesn't have an announcer attached to it and you want to throw me on that game, I would take it. And
Oh,
lo and behold, last year my boss gave me the Georgia-Kentucky basketball game in Athens. And if I
wow.
tell you, Jess, it was not a major college basketball game other than the fact that Kentucky is a blue blood and Georgia ended up
Mhm.
pulling off the upset in that game. But it was one of the most memorable games that I have ever called
Oh,
or ever covered in my life because it became a huge family reunion. My whole family drove up to Athens from Florida. My parents came down for the game. It was tremendous. I will never forget that moment. And my boss and ESPN as a whole made that possible because they realized there are so many times where I'm missing out on birthdays and Thanksgivings and Christmases and Hanukkahs and New Year's Eves and you name it. The sports calendar is its own calendar. We don't follow the same calendar that everybody else does. We don't get weekends off. I don't get vacation time. I have to make
mhm.
my vacation time, and every time I do, I'm missing a game. I'm missing an event,
Yeah.
and a little part of the sportscaster in me dies when I'm turning down work because you feel like you're never going to make it back. But probably when my son went to college was the first time it really hit me like, now I have to do something about this. I can't just
Mhm.
talk about it and think about it. I actually have to actively participate in balancing out that work life thing that I was talking about.
And with that, I mean, I would assume do your kids think it's super cool because, and not just the fact like, oh, dad's on TV, but there's that Georgia attachment and the fact that you can kind of be a part of that. Because I remember watching my dad at work. I'd go visit him at work. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And my mom got to watch me and do what I had to do. And that was extra special. Do they think it's cool that dad's doing what he's doing?
I think they do when I get to take my sons on our annual NBA trip. We go to a different NBA city every year, just the three of us. And so, do I get good tickets? Yes. Do I know a
Yeah.
number of the NBA players who have come through the college ranks and I've called their games and we get to take pictures with them? Yes. All the fun stuff that comes as an ancillary thing to what I do they think is very cool. Even my
Mhm.
daughter, who's not a huge sports fan, she's athletic, but she's not a
Mhm.
huge sports fan. She loves the fact that some of her guy friends know who I am.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've gotten to come to school and speak to classes on the Great American Teach-In Day that's in November every year. Those are the cool things, and it helps me build a connection with my children that sometimes I feel like doesn't exist. You know, they're inside the
Mhm.
house and they want to be left alone and be in their
Yes.
rooms and hang out with their friends and be on their phones, and that's it.
Yeah.
Outside the house, they are a totally different person. But when that bridge gets or that gap gets bridged because they text me and go, "Oh, Dad, I was talking to so and so, and he said he saw you on TV last night, and that was so cool." That makes me happy. None of
Mhm.
my children wants to do what I do. I'm sure your mom and dad over the moon that you're doing what you're doing. None of my kids has any desire to do what I do, but they like the fringe benefits that come
Right.
along with it, for sure.
And tell me a little bit about these relationships because it's something that doesn't go unnoticed. When you are in college, you saw these guys before anybody knew who they were, and they have a different mentality, as do you. And then you get to form these relationships when they hit the NBA. What's that kind of like? Because you cover a guy, I feel like there's a father figure mentality too. You watch them grow up, and now they're playing for the NBA and you get to say, I knew them back when. Is that kind of how these relationships start? Because I know you're very much relationship based.
Yeah, I believe we are in the relationship business. I'm a networking evangelist. And that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I talk to students I mentor is we are in the relationship business. You could build your network all you want, and it's easier to do that now than it was certainly when I was getting out of college because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have social media. So people get fooled into thinking they're building a big network by connecting with people on LinkedIn or on Instagram or on X or whatever the social media platform is.
Yeah.
But you're really just a mile wide and an inch deep at that point, as far as social media goes. You have to build your relationships and keep in touch. It's not about getting in touch, it's about staying in touch
Yeah.
with people. And while I'm not saying that's my case with these athletes who have become professional athletes, it is nice to know that my connection to them that I made with them in college still remains strong to the day that they are now making millions of dollars in the NBA. Perfect case in point. Last year, my son's favorite player, John Morant. So I said, we're going to go to a Memphis Grizzlies game. And Desmond Bain is obviously one of the star players on Memphis's team. And I don't like to overpromise and underdeliver. I try to do the opposite. I
Yes.
underpromise and overdeliver by way of surprising them with certain things. And so last year we had great tickets to a Grizzlies game. We got to tour the arena beforehand. They were playing the Golden State Warriors, which was extra special because everyone loves
Mhm.
Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. But I knew my son would be thrilled at he wasn't going to meet John Morant at the time because of what Ja was going through.
Yeah.
But we got to meet Desmond Bain, and I covered Des when he was at TCU. And to get to go on the floor during warmups and take a picture with a guy who's now making $20 million a year and one of the best
Mhm.
three-point shooters in the NBA is something I know my both of my sons, but especially my 14-year-old, will never forget. And that's been happening now for the last 5 years or so. I really cut my teeth at ESPN covering the Missouri Valley Conference and Wichita State when they were making Final Four runs and going undefeated in the regular season. And yes, Fred VanVleet was the star of that team. Haven't been to a Raptors game yet with my kids to have them meet Fred, but Ron Baker was one of the stars on that team. And Ron's not in the NBA anymore, but he was playing for the Knicks for a short amount of time. And we went to a Knicks game and got to go on the floor and hang out with Ron Baker. And just the look on my son's faces when they see that and when they see their dad give a bro hug to an NBA player, it makes it all worth it. It makes it all special. And it gives me a sense of pride to know that these athletes still are invested in those kind of relationships.
And I looked at your website and I noticed one of your main focal points was, authenticity and being authentic. And I would assume the reason why they still respect you is because of who you are and how you deliver yourself. How can people tap into that? Because I look at my social media page and there's times where I'm like, I wish I was that girl. I wish I was the girl I portrayed on my Instagram with the filters and acting a certain way. And it's so easy to kind of go down that road. But how do you tap into that, especially as a young person trying to make it in this industry to develop these relationships?
That's a fantastic question, Jess. And the simplest answer, honestly, is you just got to keep doing it, right? You
Hmm.
need experience. You need, I talk about reps, 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 reps. I
Yeah.
could coach you, I could teach you, I could prompt you with any number of sayings and advice and all of that. None of that's going to take the place of actually going out and doing it. And you're right. One of the things that I talk about a lot with up and coming sportscasters is tapping into the best version of yourself. And I use kind of a weird example, but I'm a pop culture fanatic. And when I was
Hmm.
growing up in the 80s, there was a fantastic mockumentary called This Is Spinal Tap. I don't know if you've heard of it or if you're too young to
I
have
don't
heard of
think
it, but you
so.
haven't, make sure you look it up. This is Spinal Tap. It's the same group of actors, comedic actors, who did Best in Show and A Mighty Wind, really, really funny movies. But this was a mockumentary about a British rock band, and they were being covered as a rock band touring for like the last time.
Hmm.
And they showed their director of the documentary that they invented a speaker that turns to 11. So most speakers turn to 10. Well, we created a speaker that turns to 11. And it was a funny skit and it was a funny bit in the movie. But the reason I share that with these students is we all need to tap into our 11. On television, if you think you're being energetic and you think you're being enthusiastic and passionate, the lens kind of deadens everybody's personality. So a perfect example of the extreme is nowadays the confrontational, argumentative style of sportscasting dominates, right? On all the networks, everybody is shouting at each other just to be noticed. That's not being the most authentic version of yourself. That's not Stephen A. Smith. That's not Skip Bayless. That's not Shannon Sharp. That's who they play on television. As sportscasters, I think we need to be more authentic to ourselves. So you still need that enthusiasm. You still need to tap into that 11, but you still need to be the best version of yourself that you could be. And sometimes it goes along with what you said earlier, Jess. You have to find a balance between being educational and entertaining. I call it edutainment. You need to be both.
I love that.
And I'll take it a step further. I'm a big fan of alliteration. So I use the two A's. You need to have accessibility and you need to have authority. So what does that mean? It means essentially the same thing. You need to have a personality that people want to watch and listen to and hang out with, but you also need to have a certain amount of expertise in what you're talking about so you have credibility and people will continue to listen to you and trust you that you're giving them the information that is most critical. Those are the two things that I think once you find that perfect balance, then you know you're being your most authentic self. And really, like I said, the only way to do that is to practice, rehearse, and get as many reps as you possibly can.
And you know what's interesting is because I hear that too, getting reps, it's not just about reps as far as on camera or on the radio or podcast. It's about introducing yourself and networking. And I'm glad you mentioned the authority thing. When I first walked into a clubhouse, I was like, I shouldn't be here. I should not be here. I don't know why I'm here. And the moment I turned that off, and I wasn't cocky about it, it was, I have to be there and I deserve to be there. I have an assignment to do. And have you noticed there's a lot of confidence issues when it comes to this job, but there's also too much confidence I've noticed in certain aspects. How have you noticed the confidence aspect when you're mentoring or just you see somebody young in the studio for the first time or in a clubhouse for the first time? How have you noticed some of those things?
I have absolutely noticed both. First of all, the first thing you're talking about, Jess, is known all over the industry and other industries as well as imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I felt the same
Queen
thing.
of it. Queen of it. Yeah.
Right. You go into an assignment, even if it's an assignment you've been doing over and over again, and you're waiting for someone to call you out. Like, why are you here? You don't know what you're talking about. You are a fraud, and I have finally called you out on it. That's normal, right? That's a normal level of anxiety that most of us have in any industry that we're in, but especially in an industry where we are putting our face on camera and our voice into a microphone. I've also, to an alarming degree, noticed a lot of that overconfidence that you talk about, like irrational confidence. And I think the reason is it goes back to social media. Clicks and likes and followers does not mean you are an expert or an authority. And people get fooled, especially younger people in our industry, fool themselves into thinking they are more important and they are more part of the story than we should be. We are not part of the story. We are delivering the story. The person we are talking to is the star. All we are as broadcasters is a glorified traffic cop. We're getting from one question to the next, from point A to point B, from topic to topic, from the last topic to a commercial break. And that's really it. So we need to check our egos at the door. The one thing that really bothers me, and you see it all across our industry, is when people preface a question by rattling off statistics as if to prove the person they're talking to and to the audience who's watching, see how much I know. Now I want to ask you a question. Just ask the question. Keep it as short and simple and edited as you possibly can. Because guess what? No one wants to hear what we have to say. They want to hear what the person you're talking to has to say, the athlete, the coach, the manager, you name it. And sometimes it's tough. You need a healthy amount of ego to be in this business in the first place, right? You have to have that confidence. But you don't want to cross the line from confidence into cockiness, because then you find yourself thinking that you are more important than you actually are. Not only are you not as important as you think you are in that moment, but you could easily be replaced by the next person who's graduating college and coming up the ranks and could ask questions better than you and doesn't have nearly the ego that you have because you have 50,000 Instagram followers. Just doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think that's been the most difficult thing for a lot of people to navigate. And even people coming up to me and talking about my follow count. And at the beginning, it was cool. Like, it was like, yeah, I have this amount of followers and it's great. But I had to really turn that into a career because my followers don't give me a paycheck. The amount of followers doesn't compute to the money in my bank account. So that was very difficult for me to kind of take a step back. And I almost resented having the following because I just wanted to do my job at the end of the day. But tell me a little bit about break-in and breakthrough, because this is kind of the pillar of everything that you're telling us now.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I started this company 2 years ago. It was an outcropping of the COVID pandemic, to be honest with you. I was at home doing virtually nothing back in 2020, and I had a lot of students who were in sportscasting, mostly from Syracuse, because they were most familiar with me, but people from all over the place calling and saying, would you mind taking a look at my demo reel? Would you mind having a conversation? And I ate that up, because the one thing that we lack fundamentally in our business, Jess, and you know this, is feedback. We do not get the critical feedback that we need to be better at our jobs. All of a sudden you find out, oh, wait, my contract's being renewed. Why? Why am I being replaced? You never told me I was doing a crappy job. You never told me I was doing a great job either. So how was I to know how I could get better? Feedback is the one thing that we fundamentally lack in our industry. So I found that giving that feedback not only fortified me, but I was helping people at the same time. And I did something that was on my list of goals from way back when. I want to teach. I thought it was going to happen when I retired, that I would find a university, maybe go back to Syracuse as an adjunct professor and teach. I wanted to give back. I didn't think it was going to happen this early in my career, but my best friend, who was also my college roommate, said to me, I think you have the makings of a business here. And I had imposter syndrome. I was like, you're crazy. No one wants to hear what I have to say. There are sportscasters who are much more successful, much better at what they do, and much more popular than I am. So who's going to listen, let alone pay for something that I have to say about my experiences? And he's like, you'll be surprised. And so over the next year, we hammered out a program and the foundation of an 8-week course. And I said, let's just throw it out there and see what happens. This is the good side of social media. I built this business completely through LinkedIn, only through LinkedIn. I've since branched out into using X and using Instagram, but initially it was all through LinkedIn. And lo and behold, the first program that I was advertising, I capped the number at 12 students because I knew I was going to be giving individual attention to each of these, and I only had a certain amount of time. So I limited it to 12. And 2 years later, I have over 100 plus young aspiring sportscasters who have come through the program. And I think it's helped them in some way, shape, or form. It's meant that much more to me. It is so fortifying to know that no matter what else I do in my business, This now is going to be my legacy much more than any game I call on ESPN or however far the Rays go in a playoff run this year or any other year that I'm hosting their pre and post game show. This break-in and breakthrough program is going to be my legacy.
And with that, I mean, obviously, I think there's no way it was easy because you're shaping young minds and helping them. So what's been the biggest surprise or challenge with the teaching aspect of it all?
Well, for me, Jess, the hardest thing is, again, getting the feedback that I've received, which has been overwhelmingly positive. I still see maybe 15%, at most 20% of these people who spent their hard-earned money to sign up for this cohort not using all of the tools that I gave them. One of them is keeping in touch. I have an alumni group now, and out of the 100+ people who've come through the program, maybe 20 to 30% of them have done what I would consider to be an admirable job of keeping in touch, not just with me, but with other people in the alumni base. I set it up for them to succeed, but as the old cliche goes, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. I've led them to the water. Yeah, and it is a grown-up network that we are in. You have to do the work yourself. I could show you how to do it. I could advise you on how to do it. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do that yourself. And so I've learned and had to teach myself through the ups and downs of the last couple of years that it's okay if 80% of the people kind of fall off to the fringes. Celebrate the 20%. Celebrate the 15% of the people who have kept in touch with you and who you're seeing succeed as they go on in their careers, and continually come back to you and say, just got a great job opportunity, just started a new project, couldn't have done it without your help. I still go back to some of the things that you said in the cohort. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And that, it warms my heart, it makes me smile, and it makes me realize that at some way, shape, or form, we're always playing the percentages, and you're never going to get 100% buy-in from employers or employees, just like you're not going to get 100% buy-in from the people you build relationships with.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all of that. I feel like you're giving me a free session over here, and it's wonderful. I want to shift gears.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears. The Aaron Hernandez story, the trial, all of it. I listened to a podcast that you were on, and you essentially got a call saying like, "Hey, can you stay in the Boston area and cover this scenario?" They don't even know all the details yet. And when it comes to sports and news, this particular instance, sports was such a minute part of it. So how do you, I guess, approach that when it comes to covering a news story where sports really don't matter in that case?
Another fantastic question. First of all, I go all the way back to my education at Syracuse. When I was a freshman and a sophomore in the Newhouse School, I was like everyone else, chomping at the bit to get on TV. And at that point, they had student-run television station. It was called UUTV at the time. It is nowhere near the monolith that it is now. It's called Citrus TV now. They had great radio stations. I could go over the laundry list of sportscasting legends who went through the radio station at Syracuse. I was not one of those guys because, remember, I didn't want to do play-by-play at the time, or I didn't think I wanted to do play-by-play at the time. So even at Syracuse, I took a little bit of a different path than most traditional or orthodox careers that you would know about. But the one thing I did do, because I had to as a student there, I learned how to write, and I learned how to news gather, whether I was going to be a news reporter or a sports reporter or an entertainment reporter. The basics, the fundamentals of gathering news and writing about it for broadcast remain the same. And they remain the same to this day, right? Keep it short, keep it simple, lead with the best thing you have. All of those elements that I learned as a freshman and a sophomore, and then into my junior and senior year in college, I attributed 20 years later when I got this Aaron Hernandez assignment. And it was awkward for me. I was working for the NFL Network at the time. And like you said, I got a call. Hey, instead of flying home, could you go up to Boston? I was like, okay, why? Well, something's going on with Aaron Hernandez. We're not quite sure what it is. Remember, at the time, the Patriots were the Patriots, right? It was Tom Brady. Yeah. They were winning Super Bowls. Aaron Hernandez was arguably one of, if not the best tight end in football. So I'm like, oh, this is cool. I get to hang with the best team in football, with this dynasty. Little did I know that I was going to be spending the next 10 days camped out outside of Aaron Hernandez's house. As it ends up, I was the first reporter on national television to have the story on the air when Aaron Hernandez was taken out in handcuffs. I had CNN to one side of me. I had Good Morning America to the other side of me. That was as disturbing as the whole scenario was. Mm-hmm. I also knew in the back of my mind, this was going to be one of the most memorable moments of my career. And I just remember thinking, don't screw up the story. Just report the facts. I was not there to give my opinion. I was not there to color it in a way that it wasn't. All I was there to do was report the facts and give the latest updates that I was receiving. So again, to your point, I had to do things that I wasn't used to doing as a sportscaster. I had to go talk to police officers and detectives and be as enterprising a reporter as I could possibly be. You go into a clubhouse, and you know this better than anybody, Jess, a 162-game baseball season, halfway through the season, if not earlier, you are scrounging for fresh story ideas, right? It becomes the dog days of summer really quickly in a 162-game baseball season. Well, I had a story in front of me that I knew I had to cover, but I also knew everyone else was covering. So how was I going to make the NFL Network's coverage that much more compelling when no one was expecting that from the NFL Network? We are covering sports. We are not covering a murder investigation. So I relied on all the tools that I was given at Newhouse as a college student. And thank goodness I relied heavily on my broadcast writing skills. And I kept it short and I kept it essential. And everything worked out from the broadcast perspective for me, and got, really tremendous feedback on the job I did. Would I ever want to do that again? No, absolutely not.
Well, and tell me a little bit more about that, or as far as like dipping into the justice system, because when you are spending your career doing something else and you can't F up in this regard because you have to keep the facts, was it kind of cool to learn something new about the justice system and law and everything in that regard? Because that's interesting.
It was. I was learning on the fly in some instances, just being there. Like it was an out-of-body experience, honestly, a number of times. Like taking a step back in between my live shots, I would look around and I would see these national correspondents who I watched on television. So every chance I got, I would kind of like inch over under my tent and kind of eavesdrop on what CNN was talking about, what Fox News might have been talking about, what GMA or the Today Show, how they were handling the situation. And then after the arrest was made, everybody dispersed. And a couple of weeks later, we all reconvened in Falls River in Massachusetts for the hearing. And being in a courtroom was really eye-opening, because then you have to follow certain protocols. And the good thing about it is the justice system is extremely iterative. They are very intentional when dealing with the media. So someone would come out and tell everybody, even if you were a court reporter, you had to listen to that same spiel from that court report, from that person in the court saying, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be let in at this time. You're going to sit in these seats. You will not do this. You can do this. There were a set of rules, and if you didn't follow them, you were kicked out of the courtroom. So I, just sat there and kept my eyes open and my ears open and my mouth shut. And that was, it was an education for sure. And like I said a moment ago, is it something that I would look forward to doing again? No, because it means, it is never forgotten that lives were lost, lives were changed irrevocably because of what happened. The gravity of that was never lost on me, even though I was a quote unquote sports reporter covering a news story.
No, and I think there's definitely respect there too, where you're not sitting there talking about the numbers he did on the field. It's all about what's going on, the facts. I think that's very admirable, and it's a difficult thing to do. So I commend you on that. There's no better segue than to say, let's talk baseball. I don't know how else to say that, but
All
it's
for it.
interesting because you are experienced in this industry. That means you've seen different eras of the game of baseball, and there's obviously these new rules that are introduced. I personally hated them at the beginning. I got exposed to them. I did some AAA coverage last year, but let's talk about the pitch clock. You want to talk about spending more time with your family. This is a beautiful thing. How did you embrace these new rules, or did you at all? Did you go into it kicking and screaming? What was your scenario when you discovered about the new rules, and how are you kind of acclimating to them now?
Well, I am completely acclimated. I was a little different than you, Jess. I was all in, 100% all in. And one of the reasons, and I say this with all the love and respect in the world for the team that I've covered the last decade, the Tampa Bay Rays, they were one of the biggest suspects when it came to playing long games. They were, most of their games were criminally long. I could share the lyrics with you when we finish here. A few years ago, I wrote a satire song based on Billy Joel's song "The Longest Time." If you know that song, I wrote a song about the Rays called "The Longest Game" because the Rays were habitually going 3:15, 3.5 hours. When I heard there was going to be a pitch clock and games were going to be shorter, I was like, I am here for it. And lo and behold, now the joke in my house is every time I come home from a game, whether it's a home game or I'm in studio and come home, the first thing my wife says to me every time I walk in the door is, "You're home already?" And she still can't get used to the fact that I'm home. It might be 30 minutes earlier than normal. Sometimes it's 45 minutes earlier than normal. But I think it has been received 100% approval rating. I don't know of anybody who says, I wish the games were longer. And then the only thing the traditionalist in me looks a little sideways at are the monster numbers that are going to be now normalized. Like you see Ronald Acuna going 40-70. No one has done that before. Maybe no one's going to do that again for a number of years. But I don't think those numbers would have been possible without the rule changes. And look, personally, I witnessed Josh Lowe this year. He's a 20-30 guy. Most people outside of the Rays organization don't know who the hell Josh Lowe is. But he's in his first full year in the bigs, and he was always touted as a 5-tool player. He was a high-round draft pick a few years ago by Tampa Bay, won minor league player of the year a couple of years ago. But did everybody see 20 home runs and 30 stolen bases in his first full year in the bigs? No. Would he have done that with the rule changes? He probably wouldn't have done it if the rules hadn't changed this year. That doesn't take away from how outstanding he's been this season, just like it doesn't take away from Ronald Acuna. But the old man get off my lawn in me is thinking, gosh, I wonder how the other people feel, the guys who played the game. I wonder how they feel. It's just like you talk to pitchers now who, won 300 games. That's never going to happen again. But that's not because of rule changes. That's just because the game is managed and played and strategized differently than it is. You have to embrace change in sports, and it's going to happen. And you have to trust that the powers that be who are making these changes are not making it for money reasons. They're not making it for personal gains. They're doing it for the betterment of the game. They are stewards of the sport. And my trust is with them. They're a lot smarter than I am. And I personally think that all the changes have been almost terrific, if not really, really good for everybody involved.
I agree. We had a 3-hour and 10-minute game not too long ago, and I threw a fit. I'm like, what is this madness? Like, it's not like I have a social life, but I did. It's going to be struggling from it. And it's interesting you brought that up. We're obviously watching Estate Uri Ruiz go for a rookie AL Rookie of the Year, a rookie honor. And we had Ricky Henderson and him kind of just shooting the shit recently, talking about what they were able to do for the A's organization. And we wouldn't have had that if it wasn't for these new rules. So I'm kind of thankful for that. And just to embrace every single era. And old man yelling at the clouds, get off my lawn. There is one of that guy in every single one of us baseball sportscasters. It just is what it is. Let's go and talk more about the Rays. And I think you can agree with me. I think things definitely changed for the better once Kevin Cash took over. And you've been a part of this team for so long, low payroll and not really expecting much heading into each season. I think things have been more respectful over recent years. But what's changed with that team in addition to Kevin Cash? Because there's just that's not a team that you mess with anymore.
Yeah, I think they're here to stay, and their window right now, every team has a window. No one's good forever. The New York Yankees proved that this year. You know, they're not going to the playoffs for the first time in a long time. The biggest difference with the Rays, and you're right, I watched Kevin Cash essentially grow up as a manager. When he was hired, it's easy to forget that he was a bullpen coach for the Cleveland Indians at the time and got this manager's job. So everybody's assumption, and it was a fair assumption, was he's a good baseball mind, but he's also going to be easily managed himself, meaning the front office is going to be doing most of the move by move managing before the game. And in-game stuff, he'll be able to grow into. What I have found through the years with Kevin and with our front office is that it's all based on communication, which is ironic based on the conversation you and I are having right now. I think what Pete Bendix, who's the general manager of the Rays, told me not too long ago, we were talking about managers getting fired and managers winning awards and the difference between those two and how sometimes it's not their fault or their benefit. And he said to me, look, I only know Kevin Cash. I don't know any other manager nearly as well. He said, but Kevin's won the AL Manager of the Year the last 2 years. And I could tell you that what everybody sees and what they voted on to give him that award amounts to about 2% of what we love about Kevin Cash as a manager. And what he was telling me was, without saying it, everything that goes on in the clubhouse, behind the scenes, the communication with player and player, it all matters more than just the 2.5 to 3 hours in between the lines of a baseball game. Is he really adept at managing a game? Yes. Does he have help along the way from analytics, from the front office, from the scouts, you name it? Yes, he does. But in this day and age, every manager does. It's different than it was a generation ago. It's different than it was 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So there's no team that has a manager that's pulling a pitcher or putting in a pinch hitter just on feel. Oh, he's hot. I just have a feeling he's going to get us a game-winning RBI in the bottom of the 8th inning. No one does that anymore because all the numbers are laid out for you. So Kevin Cash is only a victim if every other manager is a victim. I think what makes Kevin Cash special is his ability to connect to the players and to galvanize a clubhouse. And that leads me to my other point about what I've seen from this Rays team and why their window of success is much wider than other teams. It doesn't even matter that they're low payroll anymore. It's the fact that their front office has made somewhat of a shift from building through their farm system. And I think just last night, AAA Durham lost in the International League Finals. They would, if they had won that game, they would have won their 3rd straight International League title. But they lost last night, still making it to the championship game 3 years in a row. The Rays front office has made a shift from building almost exclusively through their farm system into delving into trade market and free agency and things like that. to build their roster. They manage their 40-man roster better than any team in baseball. So every year for the last few years, you look at the numbers, and Kevin Cash has used more players and more pitchers than anybody in baseball. It's not just because the players get hurt, although this year's a big reason why. They do it because they have the depth and versatility that not a lot of teams have. And they've done that. They've acquired all that depth and versatility because they don't just rely on their farm system. They are scouring the other 29 major league teams to find maybe some cast-offs, maybe some people that didn't work out with other teams and said, we see something in this player that we think will benefit our team and benefit this individual as well. With the bullpen, I used to call them the island of misfit toys. It was all cast-offs. It was all dudes that no one wanted anymore. They were DFAs. They were Rule 5s. All these guys that no one thought was valuable anymore. The Rays found value in them, and they all came together and galvanized into one championship caliber team. And that's what they've done the last 5 years that they've made the playoffs.
And I'm glad you mentioned it. The whole low payroll thing isn't even talked about anymore because that's been spoken about into the ground. And I will say, I'm going to let you go on this. Kind of a question and a hot take, cold take. I don't know. The front office very much has ownership's blessing to spend money. Does that mean we have a possible bid for Ohtani in 2024 for the Rays?
I wish I could give you a scorching hot take to end this conversation, Jess, but I don't think there is any chance in a million years that happens. I just don't see. What are you going to say?
I don't know. I think they're gonna have a PowerPoint presentation with his agency. I think something's gonna happen. It'll be like, why not? I know Ohtani doesn't really love the East Coast, but when it comes to winning, he'll listen. I feel like he'll listen.
Yeah, he would. And there are people out there that are putting together variables that would say, even financially, the Rays could make this work. Tyler Glasnow comes to mind. He's most likely not going to be with the Rays much longer after this season, maybe into next year. But after that, we don't think so because of the way that the Rays manage their payroll. Wander Franco is the looming dark cloud. No one really talks about it right now, but in the offseason signed a monster deal as far as the Rays are concerned, a monster deal. Those numbers might be coming off the board. So there are ways to somehow, some way, make it work with Shohei Ohtani. I just don't think, even though the Rays have been as unorthodox as any team in baseball and found ways to make that unorthodoxy work, I just think the numbers are too high for the Rays front office to sign off on one player getting that much money, especially not knowing if he's going to be able to pitch and hit like he has been this past couple of years.
Yeah, I guess that conversation did occur before the injury, but I feel like when Ohtani's injured, does that even count as an injury? Because you're like, oh, we'll have a backup plan. He'll just DH, and like Bryce Harper, when he got the Tommy John, it was a different scenario because he's a position player and DH. Anyways, Rich, this was a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for stopping by. This is so much fun.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, Jess. Anytime.
All right, that was my talk with Rich Hollenberg. So if you have any questions about getting in the industry, I highly suggest following him and just picking his brain. He's very open about talking with people. I think it's so important to have him as a resource because I didn't have that when I first got in the industry. And I think it's so imperative to have people to give feedback, bounce ideas off of, and just remind you you're not going crazy because getting started in this industry is extremely difficult. And of course, to know that there are different aspects to the craft that you have to bring into it and how important it is to build relationships. So thanks again to him for stopping by, Rich Hollenberg. And thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. It was a fun one. I learned a lot and I hope you guys did too and took a lot away from it. Make sure you're following Short and to the Point on all of the platforms. Like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube at The Comeback TCB. And thanks to Philip, as always, for putting up with my BS. We'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com. awfulannouncing.com.